Hi, I'm Dan Boyd.
And I'm Megan Gleason. This is another episode of Rounding Up the Roundhouse.
If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.
Well, we're now past the 1/4 mark of the 60-day session. If it was a 30-day session, we'd be halfway done, but it is not a 30-day session, so still a lot of work to be done. But what have you been tracking, as the session really starts heating up here, Megan?
Yeah, there's so many things. I mean, we were talking this morning about how it's so hard to kind of pick and choose what you want to go to. Usually later in this session and in a 60-day session later, and maybe the final 30 days, you're having to kind of prioritize what you want to be covering. But this morning there was so much stuff going on. I was sitting in on a committee that was discussing a bill that would increase oil and gas royalty rates, the cap on oil and gas royalty rates. And this is something that's failed like 5 times already in the Roundhouse. We're seeing it again this year. But it maybe is a little different this year because the bill, instead of raising the cap statewide, and the reason they want to bump it to 25% is because that's what Texas charges and the private market charges. So the argument is making New Mexico more competitive. But the difference this year is instead of raising the cap statewide, it would only raise the cap in the Permian Basin in certain parts of the state. So that's kind of where the best of the best is. And that change got Senator George Munoz on to sponsor. And as kind of a conservative Democrat, that's a big step forward because the moderate Democrats are really the ones who have blocked the bill in the past.
But all the Republicans are still opposed to it, obviously, including the ones from that part of New Mexico.
Yeah. I think it's expected that the Republicans are still against it. They really just think it would drive operators out of New Mexico. They're particularly concerned for the impact on smaller independent oil and gas operators and companies, which the Democrats acknowledge, like we need to put some protections in place for them and not just bow down to some of the bigger companies that are producing in New Mexico. But all of the 3 Republicans on the Senate Conservation Committee, where it was heard this morning, are in or around the Permian Basin area, Artesia, Hobbs, and Roswell. So they represent that area, and they still are firmly against it.
And I've been spending some time this week kind of trying to get my arms around this behavioral health package that's moving forward. I did a story earlier this week about this 3-bill package that's moved through its first committee in the Senate, now awaiting its second committee hearing. And interestingly, it's gotten support from top Senate Republicans and Democrats who are kind of co-sponsoring. They've come together on these bills. And, the big thing would be creating a new $1 billion trust fund for mental health and substance abuse programs, but also really change how the state runs these programs and give more authority to the judicial branch to kind of oversee these regional plans. And interestingly, I had a chance yesterday to sit in on an interview with the governor, and she said she really supports the trust fund idea, but isn't convinced yet on that having the courts, run this is the best way to set that up. So I think stay tuned, but that's one bill, and that appears to be moving pretty quickly. And Senate Democratic leader Peter Wirth has said he hoped to have it to the governor's desk by the 30-day mark of the session. I'm not sure if that aggressive timeline will be met, but certainly seems to have some bipartisan support.
Yeah, that's a little interesting that the governor is feeling a little wishy-washy on that, because it was her call to Democrats, like, you need to get on board with this, and now the Democrats and Republicans on the same line, but maybe not the governor.
Well, and I think we see that on a lot of bills that kind of agree in principle on these big ideas, but then when we get into the details about exactly how it'll be done, that's kind of where I think disagreements pop up, and especially for the governor, I think she's a little concerned that maybe taking some of this authority away from the executive branch and moving it to the judicial branch, may not be the best way to go. I think the legislators kind of feel like the current system isn't working and they don't have a lot of accountability, and so the courts are willing to take this on, and that they would provide some funding for them to do that, but a lot of those kind of details to be hammered out still before that gets to the finish line.
Yeah, and it's an interesting year too because the budget is booming, and it's been booming for the past couple of years, but surplus oil and gas has really caused all of this money to flow into the legislature. And now the problem is, where do we put the money? And money doesn't solve all of the problems. As you know, we've seen a lot of money pouring into education, but not great outcomes still.
Yeah, I mean, a $1 billion trust fund almost reminds me of Austin Powers or something. I mean, just an astounding amount of money. But the state does have that type of resources to set aside, and like you mentioned, they've been doing that more, creating these trust funds to kind of give a little more stability in the future for funding different programs. It wasn't that long ago that the state budget was only $1 billion, and now it's up to $13 billion, I think, is the proposal for this year. So it's been pretty amazing revenue growth. I mean, the question is, how long is that going to last? And that kind of gets the oil and gas piece that you were talking about earlier, since that's really been the driver of the revenue windfall the state is experiencing.
Yeah, and that'll be an interesting one. We kind of talked, they briefly mentioned how it's hard to predict future prices. The boom and the bust is not like a concrete cycle. There's a lot of outside forces, other wars, politics, things that affect it that you just can't predict. But Senator James Townsend, a Republican, mentioned that the federal administration is really pushing for drilling. And we know Trump is drill, baby, drill. But Townsend said that actually results usually in lower oil prices. So right now we've got a ton of money, but if we do drill, baby, drill, we might not have as high of a surplus to send over to the state.
Yeah, and amazingly, we've been talking for a few minutes and haven't brought up crime yet, which is kind of the arguably the big issue so far of this 60-day session. A lot of other important issues as well, but the governor in her interview yesterday did kind of reiterate what she's talked about before about wanting to see some movement on some crime bills. To me, she seemed to take a little more aggressive tone even than she did during her State of the State address, and expressed some frustration with certain legislators without naming them by name, but appearing to kind of call out Senator Joseph Cervantes, among others, a little bit for their approach to crime issues. She also, interestingly, called out educators who serve on the House and Senate education committees and saying that was a conflict of interest. So I think, maybe the governor, now that we're getting into the session, getting a little frustrated that some of these bills might be moving, but might be not quite to the pace of her liking. So I think that's something to stay tuned on, especially as we get to the halfway point of the session and, the clock starts ticking a little bit for these bills to get through committee and get to the floor of the House and Senate.
Yeah, it's interesting because usually the frustration is a lack of movement. Like usually we're not seeing this kind of movement in the 60 days, and we're already seeing Saturday committees this weekend. I think there were a few last weekend, but things are rolling out really fast. We're going to start, some bills have already passed their first two committees, right? And they're going to be heading to the floor soon. It's all rolling pretty fast.
Yeah, it is moving quick. I mean, it's getting tough for us to kind of keep up with everything and juggle, what we end up covering and not. Another bill, just to mention, that was filed this week is one of the more high-profile kind of gun safety measures and banning semi-automatic weapons. This is an idea that's been proposed in recent sessions as well and hasn't made it over the finish line, but they're going to try again this year. The bill's going to start in the Senate. Interestingly, two freshman senators, Debbie O'Malley and Heather Bergmans, are going to be sponsoring that bill. So it'll be interesting to see if they get a little traction, and then Representative Andrea Romero of Santa Fe would probably carry it if it makes it through to the House side. But, that's another crime bill that I think we're going to see a lot of debate on. And obviously gun issues have really been emotional and drawn a lot of pretty heated testimony in recent years. So I'd kind of expect the same this year.
Yeah. And I want to bring up another bill too, a government-focused bill that we've seen a lot of controversy on, a lot of back and forth, a bill that would propose a salary for legislators. New Mexico is the only state in the nation that doesn't give a salary for legislators, though they do get a daily per diem and mileage rates, and they can get retirement benefits. But this bill specifically would send the issue to voters first. It wouldn't immediately create a salary. It would allow voters to decide if they want to create a salary or not for legislators. And then if passed through voters, then a 9-member commission made up of the public would decide what salary legislators should get.
And you were covering that committee hearing that was discussed, I believe, yesterday, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but that there was some bipartisan support actually for doing that, at least in that first committee hearing.
Yeah, it was not a party line vote, which is a little surprising almost. I believe it was 7-2 with all the Democrats voting in favor, but also Republican Senators Crystal Brantley and Jay Block also voted in favor of the bill. Now, they did voice concerns. The committee Republicans, including the ones that voted against it, said they really want to see term limits implemented in the legislature, and they think this bill is something they could kind of group those things together on. And so the Republicans that voted for it did mention that still, but said, maybe we can work that out later in this bill.
And that proposal is one of several kind of ideas that's been discussed and under this label of kind of modernizing the legislature. There's also been talk about changing the length of sessions. Currently we have a 60-day session in odd-numbered years and a 30-day session in even-numbered years, and maybe going to 45 days every year, which would be kind of a difference. I'm not quite sure how that would affect some of the legislation, but certainly paying legislators a salary is something that's been around for a few years, and we'll see if it gets, a little more traction this year. They have kind of taken a few steps. They began, I believe, last year or the year before, authorizing legislators to have kind of one employee per each legislator to kind of help respond to constituents and things like that. So I remember before, even when webcasting wasn't provided at the legislature. Now I'm dating myself, but it seems like there have been some steps, but this is kind of the next the next battle over whether legislators should get a salary.
Yeah, and there's this argument of there could be more diversity in the legislature if legislators were to get a salary. Like, if you aren't retired or you don't make a certain amount in a year, can you afford to take the 30 or 60 days off to go to Santa Fe or attend these committee meetings all over the state? On the other hand, there are arguments that it's kind of a self-serving bill that legislators are introducing, although the bill sponsor, Senator Katie Duig, said, most of us might not be around by the time the salaries actually get implemented, and we're not the ones deciding the salaries anyway, so we're not involved in this, and voters would approve it or not anyway. I think they said the last time that voters saw this was in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, and they voted against it, and they've voted against it multiple times, but it's been a while since voters have had a chance to talk about the issue.
Well, and I always feel like in the spirit of full disclosure, to point out that legislators do get a per diem payment that covers their food and lodging while they're in session in Santa Fe. They also can participate in a legislative pension plan. So there are a few perks that come with the job, along with some meals here and there that are provided. But it is the only state in which legislators are not paid a salary, and that's under the Constitution, which would, the reason that would require a constitutional change, as you mentioned.
And our photographer, Eddie Moore, who I've been begging to come on the podcast for so many years. What year is this, the legislature for you, Eddie?
This is the 30th year.
30 years in the legislature. Eddie Moore is our amazing photographer.
Yeah, you should definitely, at abqjournal.com, there's a photo gallery, featuring a lot of Eddie's photos that I think no matter how great of stories we write, sometimes capture the essence and the mood of things here at the Roundhouse better than we can sometimes convey. So check that out for sure.
And while we're kind of on a fun topic here, I was also covering chili bill, which is always like that's the thing that brings everybody together in New Mexico, including Democrats and Republicans, when things can get really tense in the Roundhouse. But there's a bill with 29 sponsors, both Democrats and Republicans, that would make August Red and Green Chili Month, and gave a lot of heat to Colorado. Stephanie Lord was asking if there was a tagline like "We're the best and Colorado sucks," and just
why did they say August? I saw somebody on social media pointed out that maybe December would be more appropriate since you would have Christmas as the.
Oh, yeah, August is kind of like that's the month where both northern New Mexico and southern New Mexico is harvesting, so it's kind of meeting in the middle. December is a good one for Christmas, though.
Well, we appreciate you all tuning in to our latest episode. Getting busy here, but we'll try and keep providing updates, and certainly check out our coverage at online, abqjournal.com as well.
Yeah, and you can find these episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But we'll be back soon for some more legislative news. Thanks so much for listening.